All right, there we go. AnCap Radio, hello and welcome to another episode. I am your host, Adam Carswell, the voice of liberty, joined today by a very good friend, MC Laubscher, also known as the Cash Flow Ninja. We've got an action-packed episode lined up coming your way here today. But before we do that, whether you're tuned in live, listening on the replay, or joining us at any point here through today's conversation, remember, at about the 20-minute mark, we're going to allow everyone to call in, ask questions, comments, etc. All you got to do that is tap the request to speak button at the bottom. And also, if you haven't already, follow AnCap Radio, follow MC. Make sure you like and retweet this space so we get it out to as many eyes and ears as possible. We're diving into libertarianism, voluntarism, and AnCap philosophy here today. If my friend Dave Henderson was only with us, I know he'd be excited. He always loves the philosophy conversations. He might join us later. I know he's on a flight right now. So anyways, MC, great to finally have you here. If you could just let our audience and listeners know a little bit about your background, how you first, I know this is a loaded question, but how you first became an ANCAP, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Adam. I've been looking forward to this. Always enjoy and appreciate our conversations. So I'm originally from South Africa. I grew up in South Africa during a very, very interesting time. There was a lot going on. I'm turning 45 next year. So as a young man, the country was going through a ton of changes, right? So we were going from a apartheid regime to a new form of government during that time. So I was like 11, 12 when this started to happen. And the thing about, being that age too, it was actually a gift because how we learn as children, and I see it with my own kids, is all just through observation, right? And just everything that they're seeing and that they're hearing, they suck it up like a sponge, and they can, they could read people pretty well too. Same thing for me. It wasn't what people were saying, it was what people were doing. So I started to see that there was a lot of uncertainty, there was a lot of fear, there was a lot of doubt. Nobody knew what was going to happen, and there was, of course, a ton of chaos in the country at the time. Political chaos, right? A lot of political violence, civil unrest. People were preparing for a civil war. I still remember all these things. And you had like Nelson Mandela released in 1991. He came out, and of course, he was one of the biggest terrorists that the world have ever seen. At one stage, that's the narrative, and now all of a sudden he's out. Everybody's like, well, wait a second, how's this guy out now? And then there was a general election in 94. And then he got elected as president of this new form of government. Now, in between, you saw people preparing for civil war, stocking up. It's food, water, weapons, all that kind of stuff, and people kind of go into fight or flight kind of mode, right? So a lot of uncertainty during that time. So it was very, very interesting as a young man to see that. We also had in this transition, which is very interesting. I still remember when they took down all of the flags of the current country, and at some stage we didn't have a flag. So the school that I went to, we would just hoist the school flag, right? there was no national flag at that time. There was actually a competition to design the new flag for the country at that time, believe it or not, in newspapers. Fun fact, I just remembered that. But during this time, it was kind of crazy. So you observed all of this, and then as we were transitioning into that new form of government, I still remember all of the curriculums changed in the schools. So, and I loved history and economics, and it was basically, we went back to school and they said, well, Klaus, everything that you've learned up to now was not true. Here's the new curriculum. Here's how it actually happened, or the other version of the story, right? And I just still remember at that stage that I'm like, what is like going on here? This is kind of insane. How is everything that you've just been told a lie, right? And I was still a young man at that time. Imagine you were like 40, 50, 60. How do you deal with that at that stage, right? But the gift was very, very early on. I looked at this and I said, this is like just I mean, it's you had one gang in charge, now another gang is in charge, and they've just swapped the rules around, and both of them have different narratives, and both of them are trying to create a different reality, and it's theirs. It's not even based on actual reality. So I started to realize that this whole thing is a complete fraud, and I was very fortunate enough to be able to have done that early enough. So at that stage, I was a political atheist, as you can, as Gerald Salente calls it, because you're like, yeah, it's all nonsense. Um, and that was kind of like my origin story. And then, of course, you look at the political spectrum and the government itself, and you're like, well, as you just peel the onion, you go, well, this is all a fraud. All right, the next peel, this is all a fraud. Then you get to, I loved history and economics. So you get to history, that most of it, I mean, history, as Napoleon said wisely, is just written by the victors, right? The victors write it. The people that win the wars and the battles, they end up writing the history books, and you get their version of the story.
And
So
actually, so on that topic, because you mentioned the change of curriculum while you were in uh, grade school, did the victors change? Did you notice that in the curriculum?
yeah, of course. Yeah, a completely different side of it that you're getting. So to Napoleon, excuse me, to Napoleon, this quote of the victors get to write history. They asked him, "What will history say of you?" And he's like, he doesn't really care, because the victors will write it. And at some stage, if he loses, he's not going to be able to write about himself what history's supposed to think of him. But yeah, and that's kind of continued. So I realized that was a complete fraud. And then, of course, anybody that's attended school, regardless whether it's public or private, in most Western countries, you get taught Keynesian economics. So when I started to look into that and critically just look into the economics itself, that I found out about Austrian economics just doing my own research, and came across it and thought, okay, this is interesting. And then I started to obviously read read more widely about it, and I'm like, this is definitely not taught in schools, and this is kind of the opposite that's taught in schools. So for me, I guess the gift is very early on in life to see this, and what it's led me to is a truth seeker and a freedom seeker, and trying to always critically think for myself, read as widely as I can, knowing that whatever information I'm getting is not the truth. Not even close to it. It's just the one side, or the one narrative that I'm getting. So I always try
And
to
so
read
I'm,
all
I'm
sides of
curious
it.
in regards to finding the truth, because everything you've shared just now, I mean, we've had several conversations offline that sound exactly where we're going here today, which I love. Uh, but as far as finding the truth, I would be curious to know, where do you feel like you can go and get the best answers? Um, yeah, where do you typically find your truth, or what you believe to be truth at the time that you learn it? Because we could always be wrong, right?
Yeah, there's three versions of everything, right? Your side, my side, and then kind of like the gray area where there's things that overlap, and then there's things that are just in conflict with each other. So, can you 100% find out the truth in every single instance? I think that's going to be very challenging, but I think, like, thinking, which is the hardest thing to do, why, and that's why nobody engages it anymore, um, is something that you can do. And are you going to get everything right? Absolutely not. But are you going to get closer to it? Yes. And I think it's kind of the same thing with knowledge, right? You don't arrive in knowledge. One of my mentors, Nelson Nash, always used to say that. People, they have this arrival syndrome, where people just arrive in knowledge, and they go, all right, I got 12 years of government school education. I've got 4 more years of government subsidized education, and maybe a master's degree on top of that, or a PhD, and I'm good. I don't need to know anything anymore. I've arrived in knowledge. I think, like, that's the same with truth seeking. I don't think you ever get to the exact truth, but you start to get closer to it the more that you critically analyze. And I firmly believe the quality of our life is determined by the quality of the questions that we ask ourselves. So you just got to keep asking questions and keep questioning everything. And the better questions you ask, the better answers, or the better probabilities of what actually happened and what's actually going to happen, you'll come to.
So that's a great segue as well. Before I ask my next question, I do want to remind everyone who's tuned in here now. Again, hello, welcome to AnCap Radio. If it's your first time here, long time listener, happy to have you here. Make sure you hit the like button, the retweet button, follow MC, AnCap, everyone up here on stage. We're going to be rocking for about the next 60 minutes, so make sure if you have questions or comments, you get those ready, because we are going to open up the floor soon. But MC, you said it's all about the questions that you're asking. And so I got to ask you now, what are some questions that you found yourself asking recently based on what's going on?
One of the questions that I keep coming back to is, what is the actual definition of a concept or a term or a word? Because we find ourselves to live in very interesting times. I listen to people speak, and I really try to listen and understand. And my question then to myself is, as I'm processing the information, is, okay, but this person just mentioned this concept, for example. What is the definition of that, and what does that actually mean? Because what I have found, and I mean, I think everybody that is just looking at the world right now globally and living somewhere, they're probably just shaking their heads, because words have lost their meaning, right? They're the definitions of words. I mean, there's this phrase called, it's fluid, right? Things are fluid. Definitions are fluid. I mean, this is literally what is
The word woke used to mean exactly opposite of what it means now.
Yeah, and it's all people trying to reclaim certain terms and phrases for their specific purposes. But even like, here's an example of what I'm talking about, of how crazy the world is, that we don't even pay attention to definitions anymore. Like, even in economics, right? You had certain definitions, and there were certain criteria for definitions, like recession, for example. And then when we met the definition of a recession in the United States, for example, um, because it wasn't politically feasible, then we just change it. We just change the definition, and there's no longer any metrics by which that is judged. It's almost like a figure skating contest, right? What score do we give her or him out of 10? Right. So it's everywhere. I find that everywhere, and that's why one of the things that I was excited to talk about is just sharing, touching base on the definition of libertarianism and voluntarism, and also anarcho-capitalism.
And so one thing that I've kind of been concerned about as we've built out AnCap Radio is the future worldview of what an AnCap is, or what an AnCap means, specifically because of what I just outlined, how whoever you want to call them were able to take the word woke and completely flip it. And then you shared something with me before we went live, which I think is something that, as AnCaps, or whatever you want to call us, we're all going to continue to pay attention to, which is how Malay is being associated with the word now. What are you thinking about the future definition of kind of how we, I don't even know if identify is the right word, right? But how we see ourselves.
Yeah, you look at a philosophy, and then you see, okay, this is something that I can align with, and this is similar to how I see the world and how I see how the world operates. But yeah, to your point with Javier Milei in Argentina, I just, and it's not just him. I know that there's a lot of conversation around him, but and of course, we'll see how this plays out. But if you look at media, like, I went to Google and just type in anarcho-capitalism, and I went to even the Brave browser, Yandex. I mean, I use a ton of them because all of them are different. They've all kind of like been streamlined lately, to be honest. They've all become more or less the same. But if you look at the definitions on there, and then you look at the news articles and how it's used, of how someone was elected, a anarcho-capitalist was elected the president of a state to be the number one person
which
in the
is kind of an
state,
oxymoron, right?
citizen number one, and then makes bold statements how another state has the right to exist and the right to defend themselves and the right to destroy their enemies. You're like, what am I reading here? Like, I don't think that's quite how I understood it. So if you look at like some of the terms, libertarianism, voluntarism, anarcho-capitalism, if you look at some of like the definitions, or just some basis, right? Not every definition is perfect. And by the way, because with the individuals that you find in this space are so individualistic, they have different definitions sometimes of the definition and how they live it in their philosophy. But you just need a basis, right, of something of what you think it is. So, for example, libertarianism is a political philosophy that emphasizes individual liberty, free market capitalism, and minimal government intervention in the lives of citizens. It advocates for a society where individuals are free to pursue their own interests as long as they do not infringe upon the rights of others. Key principles include individual freedom, limited government, free market economy, property rights, rule of law, which is adherence to a legal system that is fair, transparent, and applicable equally to all individuals, including government officials. And then, of course, non-aggression principle, the belief that individuals should not initiate force or fraud against others. If you look at voluntarism, it's a philosophy that prioritizes the principle of voluntary action in the social and political sphere. So it emphasizes that all forms of human interaction and cooperation should be voluntary and free from coercion or compulsion, particularly by the state. The core idea is that transactions, relationships, and societal structures function best when they are entered to and maintained by free choice rather than imposed by force or obligation. So, in the key aspects just of voluntarism is consent, obviously, freedom of association, non-coercion, personal autonomy, kind of very, very similar along the libertarian kind of principles. And then when you look at anarcho-capitalism, just as a basis, it's a political philosophy that advocates for the elimination of the state and the creation of a society where all services are provided by private entities operating in a free market. This ideology combines the principles of anarchism, which opposes all forms of involuntary, coercive hierarchies, with principles of capitalism, which supports free trade and private ownership. So some of the key tenets is private property rights. We'll see it in all three of these philosophies. Voluntary exchange, again, very, very similar. Private law and security, proposing that law enforcement, courts, and all security service should be operated by private entities and competing in a free market. And then elimination of the state, arguing that the state inherently operates through coercive means and should be abolished in favor of voluntary private systems. So it's, a lot of the themes, there's a free market system without government intervention, because it would lead to a more efficient, ethical, and equitable outcome, right? And it's funny when you look up these definitions as a baseline, some of the criticism, it's because it always says underneath it, criticisms of this philosophy say the following. So I found this interesting too. It says, critics, however, argue that such a system could lead to inequality as opposed to the system we have now, which actually fosters it, right? Exploitation, kind of comical, and lack of access to essential services for disadvantaged groups. It's kind of comical, which that's all the products of the current system. But of course, in a world that is pretty much inverted, inversion is clearly going on. Everything which is up is down, down is up. It's kind of humorous. But I think, like Adam, looking at this, and then you read the headlines of this anarcho-capitalist, which is now citizen number one, of a state and going around encouraging other states to do things and people rally around the state. I mean, it's kind of comical. So that's why I think it's so important. And that was kind of my message today, is just we have to like look at definitions or just have a baseline of it. Are these perfect? No, they're not perfect. I'm sure it's workable. I'm sure there's other variations of this. There's other views that people have, because we're so individualistic in this space. But I think these are like good baselines.
Phenomenal baselines, and I want to even say to our team, I know one thing we're going to be more proactive with on AnCap Radio now and moving forward are getting the recordings up and out through different podcasting platforms, getting the show notes. And so to our team, just remember what MC just shared there. I think that would be very important to get into the show notes. So if we write an article on this, I know Dave wants to hammer home the AnCap philosophy as much as possible. And it even made me realize, MC, if we want the world to know what these philosophies are, the best way to at least let the internet know, which is kind of the most important thing, is to build out our own platform. And hopefully it ends up at the top of a Google search. We'll see. So we have a caller. Thank you for your patience, Jaffer, longtime listener, longtime caller. Good to see you here. I know you've been patiently waiting with your hand up there. So that's also opening the floor for everyone else here as well. If you have a question or comment, just tap the request button. We'll get you up here. Jaffer, what do you have for us?
Yeah, hello.
And let us know
Guys.
where
How are
you're
you?
calling in from. Let us know where you're calling in from.
Yeah, to let MC know, I'm calling from Canada. And I wanted to answer to MC and ask him if he's enough familiar with the Orwellian book, James Orwell's book, 1940, 84, and the concept of newspeak. Are you familiar with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, we are living in a world with newspeak. Like,
exactly.
I think, yeah, it's become an instruction manual. 1984. It's no longer just fiction, right?
Yeah, sure. So we are living the era of newspeak and the blurring of the concepts and especially words, and maybe this is on purpose. Okay. A second point, you see, words have a lot of meanings, and sometimes when you want to tell the truth and maybe to describe a concept or anything, you need to choose the right words. Okay, so when you want to describe the AnCap philosophy and so on, you should have the right words to describe them. Otherwise, nobody will understand or will understand falsely. Okay, and we are in the domain of philosophy. That means that it requires the right words. Okay, so what is your take on that?
I agree. I think that one of the reasons why in the marketplace of ideas, the message of libertarianism and voluntarism and AnCap hasn't just taken off like a wildfire is because of I would say the definitions, the messaging, and sharing the message, and that's why I'm so excited about this project and what the team around AnCap Radio is doing and building, because I think it's going to serve as a platform where there's a clearer message of what it is. Because I think if a lot of people actually hear about it in the proper context and with the proper definition and using terms in the proper way, then you're going to find a lot of people are going to gravitate towards it. It has a very powerful message. It's very empowering. So I completely agree. I think it's very, very important. Words are very, very important. And I mean, we have wordsmiths out there, people that get paid for a living to just use words as tools and as weapons in an information war, right? One thing that comes to mind to tack onto when you said 1984 and Newspeak, it's like saying mostly peaceful protests where cities are burning down. And lately it's become passionate protests. I saw that too. I mean, how they come up with this stuff is incredible. But I think, we need to your point, we need to use the proper words, know the definitions, and share it in a very clear way, and share the message in a clear way. And I think that will have a lot of people gravitate towards this philosophy and approach to life.
And I guess that this kind of thinking used to exist since a long time. Like, for example, in South Africa, and I'm asking you, with the story of the Boers
Yep.
and the war between the Great Britain and the Boers, and they have been slaughtered by the British Army. And what was the propaganda? Have you learned about the propaganda used there at that time?
Oh, absolutely. There was massive propaganda. I'm actually there's a couple of books that I'm reading right now. Denise writes on.
And actually, could you backtrack a bit, because I'm not
Yeah.
familiar with the story, but I want to hear how to Jaffer's point, I want to hear how the propaganda was implemented.
Yeah. So I mean, I'll summarize this quickly. And then I'll share some examples of like current things in South Africa, because I think this will be very, very interesting and useful for folks too. But you had in South Africa, you had two Boer republics. So you had the Transvaal, the Zuid-Afrikaanse Republic, and you also had the Free State, the Orange Free State, and these two were two Boer republics. And you know, they had their independence, and the Cape Province and Natal, which had the major ports, the British took those colonies. They were British colonies, right? And again, the Boers, it's just Boer means farmer in Afrikaans. So it's, these are folks that are come from Dutch heritage, from German heritage, French Huguenot. And these were very productive people that just wanted to farm and produce and create. And you found them on the farms during that time. And they started in the Cape Colony, but as as the British started making their ways in and taking Cape Town and taking the Cape Colony, they just started the Great Trek, which is some kind of similar to what happened in the United States, where everybody went west, right? So they started the Great Trek with their ox wagons and so forth, and they ended up in Natal, and then eventually the British took the Natal, and they got in their ox wagons again, and they trekked inland and ended up in those two areas, the Orange Free State and Transvaal, which were the independent republics. And what then happened was everything was moving along until gold was discovered in the Gold Reef City, which is Johannesburg. And prior to that, they had diamonds that was also discovered up in Kimberley, but that's what's part of the Cape Province. But you had a lot of natural resources, gold being the main one, and there's a ton of mining still done in that area today. I mean, there's so much being mined there. Platinum. There's like one area in the old Transvaal that you drive down. They call it Platinum Highway because you just have platinum mines on both sides of the road. It's kind of crazy to see. So there's a lot of natural resources, and that was the main reason. I mean, we have narratives of from Cecil John Rhodes that wanted to establish a railway from Cape Town to Cairo, and basically have all the countries and all of the land along the way under the British flag, right, the Union Jack. But a lot of the propaganda again was, there's a lot of similarities. What happened too? A lot of British citizens came into the Transvaal at that time. They started infiltrating it because that's where all the business was being done, right? All of the gold was being mined. So the Boers were kind of like, the propaganda they were these beastly, uneducated, just people of the land that didn't know what they were doing, and they need they needed someone to come in and run this and a mine more efficient and all that kind of stuff. So, but they, of course, they vilified them. And you had the Boer War. You actually had several of them, and you had I don't want to go down too deep in it, but the Jameson Raid was one of the ones in the second war where they came in and try to quickly raid a part of the Transvaal. They basically got got caught by the Boers, sent back with their tails between their legs, and that's basically the build up that then started. I'm reading a very interesting book now. The Nice Races, the Commando, which is basically the version of the Boer side. He was on commando, one of the Boer commandos, and it's his diary of what was going on. And I just started it, and it's basically where they just had the Jameson raid, and they're getting all the Boers together, and they're getting ready for war. And both sides basically are getting ready for it. And the British at this stage of the book that I am have now built up and have all their troops on the border of the, ready to invade. But yeah, obviously the first thing that gets lost in war is the truth. So the same thing happened there too. And as far as like the philosophy of AnCap and of libertarianism and of voluntarism, there's great examples today there of how people live in those philosophies. I'll give you an example. So in a lot of parts of South Africa today, as we're recording, they don't have electricity. So they have rolling blackouts. They have a power grid problem. So depending on where you are in the country, you might have outages for, I don't know, 2 hours a day, 3, 6 hours, 8 hours, up to 12. At one stage, where my parents lived, and this was down in the Western Cape province. At one stage it was all the way up to 12. It's down now. It's not that crazy. But so when you have this kind of scenario, a lot of South Africans already have the mindset living in a world where they cannot count on the state to provide. So they provide themselves. For example, South Africans, most of them, when the power grid goes down, they have their own solar, they have generators, so they're still plugging along. They have their own access to water, they grow their own food. All of the things that people take for granted, they've already built their own parallel systems. If you think about a big thing that people talk about in the Western world, especially in Europe, in the United States, and Canada, and so forth, it's all about, law enforcement is a big thing, right? So you have the police and and so forth. So over there, nobody would call the police to solve a problem. So you have private security. So you already have private companies funded by or founded by entrepreneurs that saw this problem, that saw that they defunded the police. The police are so thin, they cannot be relied on as a resource. Entrepreneurs stepped in, they started companies which patrol neighborhoods, which would be the first point of contact if there's a break-in or a burglary or a farm attack and so forth. You have private contractors that you would call, not the police. So that's already another system in there. So there's many of these examples. So people always say, well, when you look at the philosophy, of AnCap and libertarianism and voluntarism and so forth, that doesn't exist. And yes, you're not going to get the state out of your life in all aspects, but there's already pockets where these types of societies exist. I'll share one more example, and then I'll pause. There's also, Doug Casey talked about this concept of files, which is from a book, one of Doug's favorite books. I forgot what book it was, but he talks about this concept of people will find each other that are like-minded with the same worldview and beliefs, and they'll organize themselves according to that. And that's already happened in South Africa too. There's a town called Orania, which is in the middle of nowhere, which people initially thought the concept was kind of crazy. It's a bunch of folks that bought a large tract of land in the middle of nowhere, and they started to build their own community. And everybody that has the same beliefs, the same worldview, this is also a same culture, Boers. They created this town, they were laughed at, mocked at, ridiculed. This has been going on now for 2 decades. It's one of the most thriving communities in South Africa. And they've built their own systems outside of the the existing structures. So they've built a parallel society and a parallel system, and they have an incredible life.
Right. I think it would make a great case study, and I wonder if there is any information out there on the I don't know what you call it, just the area, kind of showing how, you know, taking complete responsibility does work, and it's probably the best option out there. Before we continue, I do want to check. Jaffer, did you have any other questions or comments for MC?
No, so far it's okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Always good to see you here and have you here. Appreciate it. Same goes for anyone else. If you have any excuse me, questions or comments for MC as we make our way through today's show, we've got about 25 minutes left here. This is AnCap Radio, by the way. If you're listening live or on the replay, make sure you hit the like button, the retweet button. Go ahead and give everyone up here a follow, and make sure you check out MC's website, cashflowninja.com, if you're not familiar with his podcast. I remember when I first discovered it, probably like 6 years ago, and I always dreamed of this moment of sharing the stage with him, and here we are. So definitely a great show to check out if you're looking for ways to diversify your personal freedom. He's also got a book. Do you want to talk about the book briefly, MC? I know you're writing a few. You've got a few published. Tell us about your author background.
Yeah, so Cashflow Ninja was a podcast that I started. What is it? End of 2015. I think we launched beginning of 2016. So time flies when you're having fun, and never thought I could imagine that it would turn into what it would that eventually turn into. We've reached millions of listeners around the world, and we've been just honored to have some of the best minds in business and in investing on the show, sharing different strategies, insights, knowledge around business, around real estate, commodities, crypto and blockchain assets, paper assets. I mean, we've covered so much on that show. And what led to the books was a lot of people asked, MC, what were some of the best ideas that have been shared on the show with regards to asset classes and niches? We wrote a book, the 21 Best Cash Flow Niches, in which we shared, the 21 best ideas that have been shared on the show. And then we published a book, and this was in 2021. And within like 6 months, I would be getting emails. When is the next one coming out? Because there's already like 6 or 7 more ideas that have been shared that could be in another book. So we we wrote another one, and then two years down the line, we've got 3 of those. So we are relaunching all 3 of them in January. So people could go to cashflowninja.com. We're giving them away for free, the digital version. So the first book is the 21 Best Cash Flow Niches. The second book is the 21 Most Unique Cash Flow Niches. And then the third one is the 21 Best Cash Growth Niches. So there's about 63 different asset classes and niches, all alternative assets that we've researched and that we've put together in a trilogy of books.
I love it, and I'm probably gonna pick your brain offline on writing books, because I'm working on one right now, and I'm hitting that one of those walls that we call it writer's block. So I'm sure you've had to deal with that before.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I'd be happy to share. It's I think like the first book was was very challenging, and then I just, I'm a systems type of person, so I figured, okay, I got to create a system to make this work better, and just push through when it's getting challenging. So I'll be happy to share that. And and on Cashflow Ninja, we talked about freedom a lot, right? And another definition, freedom. What does it mean? What does it mean to the person, or to you specifically? So we talk a lot about that, and that was a big part of, we want to create, build, and grow our wealth in alternative assets to achieve financial freedom, which means you get your time back, right? Because you now have the finances, the financial wealth. So when you have freedom of time, you have freedom of money. Money doesn't become a reason why you're not doing things anymore. You have freedom within your relationships, which ties into the philosophies that we've discussed, and you have the freedom to pursue your purpose. I love that definition. I learned that from Dan Sullivan at Strategic Coach. But we talk about freedom quite a bit, and then we've lately talked a lot about sovereignty, which ties into the libertarian, voluntarist, and AnCap philosophies. Because you can, as we've learned already in 2020, you can have freedom in, let's just say, time, money, relationships, and your purpose. But in all other areas, it gets taken away, and are you really then that free, right? So there's a different level to it too, where you have to become completely sovereign. And we've talked a lot about how to build systems outside of the current systems that are in the process of collapsing, parallel systems, which there's so many examples of, for everybody to see, whether it's in health, whether it's in the wealth space, and also whether it's in the family space. We've seen all of these parallel systems, which is very exciting. So there's a lot of things to be positive on with regards to people actually living out some of the philosophies that we discussed.
Yeah, and so it's got me thinking about another topic we bring up often here on the show, which is, where would you believe is one of the best geographic places to live and be able to live your most free / AnCap life, or whatever you want to call it. I like when we had Jeff Berwick on the show before, because he said, well, I don't like to call it an AnCap life or a free life. He's like, I just like to call it life, and this is this is where I've chosen. And so, as someone who's moved from South Africa to the States, I know we like to make fun of our country, or whatever you want to call it, often. But clearly, you have chosen the U.S. as a place to hang your hat, at least for now. So, what's your thought process on that? And is there anywhere else that you might consider outside of the U.S.?
Yeah, I like it. Doing life, right? A life plan, like Jeff Berwick said, not just an AnCap plan. Yeah, I mean, you have to look at have to look at all these countries around the world and look at them, and I think this is another thing that I learned from Doug too. I think Doug Casey, I think he believed he shared it in this kind of context of the first time I heard it, where you have to look at all the different countries as farms. And that's how I kind of look at them, is they're all farms, and we're all animals on these farms. And, believe it or not, Orwell, again, telling us, giving us really the down low, or sharing what's actually going on. We've all realized by now, if you haven't, you're way behind the eight ball, is that some animals are more equal than other animals, or and they have different rights and privileges on these farms. So kind of my philosophy is that regardless on where you are, in what country you are, there's rules and of course laws in these countries, right? But there's different rules for different animals, because again, some animals are a little bit more equal than other animals. So you have to look at some of what some of the favored animals are doing. They are playing by a different set of rules. So if you look at in the United States, I mean, pick your country, right? There's different rules and there's different ways how people play this. So, and what I'm talking about is you can look and see, because they're giving you slightly a cheat code. You can look and see how the game is played by people that are playing at different levels with different rules, and you can implement and some of those within your own strategy to still give you pockets of freedom. So if you're in the United States and you look at the legal and tax structures, for example, of individuals that are in, I would say close to the ring of power, if you implement similar legal and tax structures and play and do everything legally within the law, you're going to have different outcomes, and you might have a lot more freedom, the same type of freedom that those folks have, than just your average person that doesn't understand that there's different levels of rules and there's different games being played within the same geographic area. So my philosophy is when people ask, what's the best place to go to? Yeah, obviously, I mean, you could look at the geopolitical mess. I mean, pick your country, there's a mess in it. But regardless of where you end up, because there's people end up in different places for different reasons, right? Whether it's family that are there, or whether it's friends, or some people they just want to stay where they're at. They don't want to go anywhere else. But even in that same geographical area, there's still things that you can do in the existing, like in the existing structure and system, to have you play by different rules. And then the other thing that I also share is, um, and I've used the analogy of farms, and I don't like to think of people as animals, but I think that people understand when you use that analogy that it's a farm, and there's different, using Orwell's kind of look at animal farm, just of how there's different rules to use. Well, you can hop between all these geographical areas, these farms, and stay where you're treated best, end up treated best. So that's kind of how I look at it. I don't think there's one clear answer. I've heard a lot of folks, everybody has kind of a bias, but I don't think there's one perfect area. But there are some areas that might be better for you, of looking of what you're trying to do for yourself and your family. So, yeah, that's kind of my take on that.
That's a good take, and I do want to follow up with it and see if there are any areas that have caught your attention personally. I think, as someone who, I know it sounds crazy to say that I would have moved from Florida to Toronto recently, but I did, exactly because of what you're talking about, family. And you know what? The quality of my life is exactly the same. And the key is, I think, access to information, access to, how I see it, people like you. I mean, this is how I know I'm not going crazy and I stay sane, is to have you and our, the group that we meet with frequently. Sometimes that's all you need. And I think, as long as you're able to, we'll call it, evacuate your current geographic area in 3 days or less, I feel like that's a pretty good gauge to tell how free you are. Like, if something goes crazy, you can get out of there, you move your family or whatever to somewhere else in less than 3 days, then you're going to be in a pretty good position to thrive wherever. So, all that being said, I think have you recently chosen Florida? Did you guys go there yet, or where else might you be looking outside of U.S. borders as well?
Yeah, I would just say to Adam that you should plan accordingly for every scenario that you think that could possibly, that there's a high probability of playing out. So, wherever you are, look at different scenarios of what could potentially go down, and then have plans of those in place. And obviously, a solid plan B is is something that a lot of people that we have in our circles are very, very much also identified as something that is very, very important. So you have to have a plan B. Yeah, we're still in Pennsylvania. I would at least say cities are going to be a big issue in the coming years. I don't think that is anything illuminating to anybody that's listening. Obviously, you want to be rural, and if you can have some farmland in certain jurisdictions where there's still a rule of law, and you can defend and protect what you have and your family, then those are good spots to be in. But then, obviously, you should definitely take a look at a plan B, and it could be that there's a lot of different reasons why you might look at different countries for a plan B. I'm of the opinion, being from South Africa, that in another scenario that we've had, or like 2020, for example, if we have another 2020 in a country that is very disorganized and that doesn't have the infrastructure to enforce anything, that might not be a bad spot to be in. So, being from South Africa, I mean, that was not a bad spot for a lot of folks, depending, of course, where they lived, right, and what areas they lived during that time, because there wasn't really anybody enforcing anything, and they just lived their life as if or nothing was going on, or as they've lived it before prior to that. So, and that's why a lot of people stay there too. I have friends in South Africa, I have family in South Africa, and it's funny that people always ask, well, are they ever going to get out of there? Well, some of them are pretty happy where they're at on very large pieces of land, in the middle of nowhere, completely, self-sustainable and sovereign, growing their own food, access to water, means to protect themselves, and they're just kind of left alone. So yeah, and they're in a country where there isn't really infrastructure to enforce anything. So yeah, so I think there's a lot of different reasons why folks might be. For me personally, I'm just in Pennsylvania, and of course I've got, as I mentioned, I've kind of like looked at different high probability scenarios and planned accordingly for it. South Africa is obviously a very interesting place, and it's going to continue to be very interesting. But depending on where you are, it could be a good hub. Like even in Africa in general, a place like Namibia could be great, very great. Huge country, small population, large, just open space. And lands and farms. And of course, there's a lot of people that have already spoken about the Caribbean and Latin America, and they're experts on that region of the world. So a lot of those countries are pretty attractive too.
Right. Yeah. There's an overwhelming majority of our guests lean towards Central and South America, and I think for all of the right reasons. Even next week we'll have Nick Giambruno joining us, who I know is in Argentina. You mentioned Namibia there. That's always been, I'd say, a bucket list of mine since I've first discovered it. And it's funny. I heard Doug was on a podcast, and he was like, if I was 30 years old again, I'd go to a country in Africa. I asked him which one. He said Namibia. I'm like, okay, that must be the one. So looking forward to checking that one out eventually, just from curiosity perspective. But one thing also, as you mentioned, just having that plan B, one thing that I was really happy about us moving here for is like, wow, at least during the 2024 election year, I won't actually have to be living in the U.S. That's always an interesting time to be in America. So I don't think we're going to see, everyone talks about civil war and all these things. Could it happen? Sure. I think we're pretty far from it actually taking place. I think even just the U.S., we talk about it collapsing often, but it's, I don't know. You can never be so sure, right? But it seems like we're pretty far from anything like that. And it's kind of like from an options perspective, as far as, we look at how fast our internet connection is today. If you need to get something on Amazon tomorrow, you can probably get it. I totally see where people are coming from, where they say that's like a bad thing. But it's kind of nice because the faster you can get things done, speed of execution does help you succeed, I would say, as a capitalist. So, and I did see RL Ziggy. I saw you had some comments in the thread about capitalism and anarchy, which I really appreciate. I would just encourage everyone, if you haven't checked out the notes in the thread there, Ziggy was dropping some stuff. Encourage everyone else to do so as well. We are going to wind it down now. If we did have anyone that wanted to call in or ask a question, now is the time. But MC, to wind this one down for today, where are you focused or really optimistic, I would say, as an entrepreneur coming into the new year?
I think that 2024 is going to be the year of chaos. Again, one of the things that I like to do kind of as a morning ritual is just like block off an hour and just think and write down thoughts and critically analyze certain things. And especially the environment has become so important, right? The global environment. And I was kind of looking at the past week every morning in that thinking time hour that I have. I was just writing down kind of scenarios of how I think what could potentially it could look like next year. And every single scenario that, in my opinion, has a high probability of becoming reality results in chaos. And it's not, it's not in the sensational, oh, there's gonna, civil war type of stuff like doomsday. I've seen all the ads that a lot of people probably in our world get because we're being targeted by the algorithms. The clock strikes, and the banks close, and cats and dogs living together, mass hysteria. Kind of Bill Murray style Ghostbusters. I just think it's going to be chaotic. So as a business owner, that operates a couple of businesses, and also as someone that likes to invest, there's gonna be a ton of opportunity, I think, for folks that mentally prepare that it's going to be chaotic. There's going to be so much emotion. You're going to be pulled in all different kinds of directions. They're going to try and suck you into whatever rabbit hole there is. And I think, my focus is in a year where I know it's going to be crazy, it's going to be wild, it's going to be chaotic, is maintaining my focus, being as mentally, physically, and emotionally strong as possible so I can focus on the things that I need to focus on, that moves the needle, in my businesses, and then obviously investments. I think there's going to be from a business standpoint, I think there's going to be massive opportunities in chaos for folks that keep their heads level, and keep plugging on, producing and creating amongst the chaos. And for investors, I think there's going to be opportunities to capitalize on, but it's going to be turbulent. I would be absolutely shocked if it's not. I said the same thing in 2019 when we had a meeting in our companies that I expect mass chaos in 2020. I didn't foresee all the the medical events that were coming and pushed on us in 2020, but it was going to be chaotic regardless because of the political climate, the polarization, in the population and so forth. So I kind of see the same thing in 2024. So keep your heads, keep a cool head, be mentally as strong as you can be, physically as fit as you can be, and emotionally strong too, and keep focusing on producing and creating during a very chaotic year.
Sure. To me, what stands out there is, in some echo of what you said, is get clear on maybe what your KPIs are for the new year. Because if you can stay focused on those, it doesn't matter what, Israel-Palestine-esque story they throw at you next, which it was, my 2 cents on that. It was actually a real shame to see just how divisive that event has been, even for AnCaps. We like to think that we're all on the same page here, which I think 80 to 90% of the time we are. But even within some of, our immediate circles, we saw tension on a topic that we shouldn't let get the best of us, just like COVID. So clear mind, I'm with you on that. And I know I'll always be checking in with you and a few others to make sure I'm staying as as focused as possible as well. Any other comments or really just key takeaways from today's conversation before we take off?
No, I really have enjoyed the conversation. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for those that have listened in and asked questions. I think like the big takeaway for me, that I just wanted to share is, just how important it is in a world that has lost its marbles to understand the definitions of terms and concepts and words and what they mean, and how you should use them, and how you should formulate them as a clear message to spread this message of freedom, and liberty, and this life, right? So I really appreciate the opportunity, and appreciate you.
Thank you, MC. Great having you here again, everyone. MC Laubscher, business owner, investor, podcaster, and author, the founder of the Cashflow Ninja digital educational platform. Check out his website, cashflowninja.com, for everything that MC is working on. That is down below in the thread. There's some other links there. You can get on our email list for updates for AnCap Radio. If you haven't already, like and subscribe. Like and retweet this session here, and be sure to subscribe to AnCap Radio. One other thing that I almost forgot, and I'm sure we're going to be tweeting it here soon. We've talked about it often the past couple months. The Guy Fawkes Award. We're getting closer to giving away our first ever winner of the Guy Fawkes Award. MC, are you familiar with Guy Fawkes?
Yes, I am. I grew up in South Africa, so we had fireworks going off in South Africa on Guy Fawkes Day.
That's great. Actually, Dave Henderson, who normally co-hosts with us every year on Guy Fawkes Day, he'll have, I think it's maybe like his nieces and nephews, and they get the family together, and he has them build a replica of a very big IRS agent, and then they burn it on Guy Fawkes Day. So on that note, the Guy Fawkes Award, just a reminder, is for someone who is successfully fighting the state around the world. I know we just received a nominee for the guy, Kirsch is his last name. I don't know if you've seen any of his stuff. He just released a report on some of the COVID vaccines. But the way it works, it's $1,000 cash prize in Bitcoin. The winner of the reward gets 80% of it, and the nominor 20%. So keep that in mind. If you want to nominate someone for the Guy Fawkes Award, email us at ancapradio@gmail.com with your nomination. Again, ancapradio@gmail.com. Email us your nomination, and we will be announcing the winner of that award soon. MC, that goes for you too. If you got anyone you want to nominate, we will gladly take them.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, thank you again, everyone, for tuning in. MC, it's been a blast. I'm sure we'll talk to you all soon. And remember, we'll see you next week, Thursday, 3 p.m. Eastern, with Nick Giambruno on that topic that we just referenced, Israel-Palestine, and just kind of looking at it through the AnCap lens. So we'll see you next week, and thank you for tuning in.